So friends, today I'm going to share with you 10 tips for calculating income from salaries. As you all must be knowing, in my last video I covered with 10 tips about total income and tax liability. So just few hours before your examination, if you go through these 10 tips, then it will be very helpful for you all. Now, in income from salaries, the very first tip which I would like to share with you all is the date of retirement. Students, whenever you are calculating salaries, then as you all must be knowing that you have to calculate basic salary, allowances, perquisites, retirement benefits, etc., etc. So students, the date of retirement plays a very important role for all these calculations. I'll give you an example. Say for example, an assessee, an employee has retired on 31st December. Now students, what mistakes generally you all commit in your examination is, if an assessee is retired on 31st December, then obviously all his calculations for that particular year as far as salaries are concerned should be only for these 9 months. Because after retirement, he is not going to receive his basic salary. Now, generally, students remember that basic salary will be covered for the 9 months in this example. But the area in which they commit a mistake are their allowances. Students, even your all allowances, like for example, transport allowances or children education allowances or even perquisites, everything has to be calculated for this 9 months. So whenever date of retirement is given in the question, you have to be very careful what is the date of retirement. Another mistake which students commit in examination is, when you are looking at the date of retirement, you have to look very carefully whether it is 31st December or whether it is 1st December, whether it is 1st January or whether it is 31st January. Because this is also an area where students generally commit a mistake. Because if someone is retired on 1st December, then obviously calculations will differ. And if someone is retired on 31st December, then the number of months will differ. So first you have to take care of the date very carefully, and secondly, after looking at the date very carefully, you have to ensure that not only your basic salary but also your other allowances, your other perquisites should also be calculated only for that specific number of months. So this is the first tip which you should take care in your examination. Friends, second and the most important tip, one of the most important tip is about identifying, differentiating between allowances and perquisites. As you all must be knowing that the taxability rules for allowances are different and for perquisites are different. Friends, many a times the terminologies which are used for allowances and perquisites are very similar. Say for example, lunch facility, lunch allowance, medical facility, medical allowance. Now, what mistake students commit is, now say for example, if question says something about lunch, then immediately students get a hint in their mind that it is exempt up to 50 per meal. But students, it is not always the case, because if lunch allowance is given in the question, then the taxability will differ, students. What mistake generally students do in their examination is that as soon as they hear the word lunch, they immediately write exempt up to 50 per meal, but that is not the case every time. Because if lunch facility is given in the question, okay, it is a perquisite, you can write down exempt up to 50 per meal. But if lunch allowance is given, then lunch allowance, my friends, is taxable. So you have to carefully see the terminologies very carefully between allowances and perquisites. Similarly, medical facilities. As soon as the word medical is given in the question, students start thinking, okay, medical facility, whether it is in India or whether it is outside India, etc., etc., etc. But that in India, outside India concept is only when medical facility is given as a perquisite. But if medical allowance is given, students, then medical allowance is taxable. There are many other examples which I can give in the similar manner, in which you have to take care whether a particular adjustment, whether a particular income which is given in the question is an allowance or whether it is a perquisites. So yes, there will be similar words, similar terminologies used for allowances and perquisites, like transport allowance, transport facility, lunch allowance, lunch facility, medical allowance, medical facility. But it's very important to identify whether a particular income is an allowance or a perquisite, and then accordingly you have to decide the taxability. So don't jump into conclusions as soon as you read or understand or listen to lunch or medical, etc. Then the third tip which I would like to give you is to differentiate between monetary perquisites and non-monetary perquisites. I have taken one of the examples over here. An employee engaged a domestic servant. Entire salary of 500 per month is reimbursed by the employer. Now what happens is, there is one particular perquisite of domestic servant which we learn in non-monetary perquisites, if you remember. If you have done with your salaries, if you are done with your perquisites, you must be remembering there is something called as free gas facility, free servant facility, etc., etc., etc. Now what happens is, as soon as a student reads the word servant in the examination, he again commits a mistake of concluding that this is a non-monetary perquisite and therefore it would be taxable, or therefore it would be exempt, whatever may be the case. But students, you have to very carefully identify that whether it is a monetary perquisite or whether it is a non-monetary perquisite. The free servant or free gas facility which we have generally studied in our perquisites is in case of non-monetary perquisite, but in this example they have used the word reimbursed by the employer. My dear friends, if it is given that it is reimbursed, generally there are two hints about monetary perquisites. One is paid by employer and the other one is reimbursed by the employer. So you cannot just directly jump into conclusion that I have studied about free servants in non-monetary perquisite, so this has to be a non-monetary perquisite and that is why I will do it according to that. No, because while determining the taxability of perquisite, first you should know how to identify whether it is a monetary perquisite or whether it is a non-monetary perquisite. So if paid, reimbursed, if similar words are given, then this is a monetary perquisites. And in monetary perquisites, you must have already studied that only scholarship and telephone bills and reimbursed are exempt, all others are taxable. So the same mistake which a student commits in allowances versus perquisites, the same mistake they also commit in non-monetary perquisites and monetary perquisites. So you have to be very careful in all the adjustment, in all the incomes, that you have to first identify the income very properly before you jump into conclusions and give taxable it or exempt it. You have to be very, very careful in identifying whether it is a monetary perquisite or whether it is a non-monetary perquisite. So yes, free servant is there in non-monetary perquisite, but this is an example of a monetary perquisite because they have written reimbursed by employer. So this would be taxable. Then my next important point, friends, is about pension. Now, in my first point, I already mentioned that you have to take care about the date of retirement. But pension is an area in which students are very, very confused. I will give you again an example over here. Say for example, an employee has retired on 31st December. And question is given that pension was 1000 per month. Now what happens, students? Basic salary will be for 9 months. The allowances will be for 9 months. Everything which is given in the question will be for 9 months. But very, very important, the pension is a retirement benefit, and therefore students, that retirement benefit is given always after you retire, and therefore in this example pension has to be only for 3 months and not for 9 months. We all know that pension is a retirement benefit. We all have studied that pension is a retirement benefit. But in examination, students again commit a mistake in pension, that because basic salary 9 months, allowances 9 months, all other calculation 9 months. So by mistake, they also do pension also multiply by 9 months. But that is not the case. Because after retirement, you get your pension. The pension cannot be for 9 months in this example. In this example, pension will be only for 3 months. In another example, pension can be for 4 months, for 5 months, for 6 months. That depends upon the date of retirement. But what I am trying to stress a point over here is that you have to take care that pension is always after the date of retirement. So in this example, January, February and March. Then my next point, students, is about gross salary or net salary. From the past 1 or 2 years, the Income Tax Act gives a standard deduction to salaries. Earlier it was 40,000, now it is 50,000. So students, if they are asking you a question which is purely based on salaries, you have to read the question very carefully, whether they are asking for gross salary or whether they are asking for net salary. And net salary is sometimes also known as taxable salary. So net salary and taxable salary would mean the same. Because students, if they are asking you with gross salary, it means they are not asking you about deductions. So gross salary is always before deductions under section 16 and net salary is after deduction. So there are similar sums in our module also, in which sometimes they have asked you about gross salary and sometimes they ask you about net salary. This can be of a very big impact in MCQs. Because in MCQs, if they ask you gross salary or they ask you net salary, then definitely answer will differ, because gross salary is before deductions and net salary is after your deduction under section 16. So you have to take care about gross salary or net salary in MCQs and also in other sums of income from salary. Then next very important point, students, is about assumptions. We all know that in professional exams like CA or CS or CMAs, we always have to take a few assumptions, especially in our income tax paper. Now, as far as salary is concerned, I have seen 3 areas in which institute generally expects students to make some assumptions, and the 3 areas are dearness allowance, the lunch facility, and the gift in kind where the value is more than 5,000. Students, in dearness allowance, if they have not given whether it is in terms of employment or not in terms of employment, then I have seen generally what ICAI does is assume that the dearness allowance is not in terms. So you also have to take care that you also assume that the dearness allowance is not in terms. Now a question may arise to a student, sir, if I assume that it is in terms, will I get it wrong? Absolutely not. If a certain assumption has to be made, it can be in terms also, it can be not in terms also. So they will not give you wrong. But if institute in their solutions is assuming many a times that it is not in terms, that is always good for a student that you also assume that it is not in terms. As far as lunch facility as a perquisite is concerned, it is exempt up to 50 per meal. Now what happens is, they don't give in examination the number of days for which the meal is taken. So what you can do is, you can assume 300 days, that the meal was taken for 300 days. But say for example, the question says that the employee retired in November or December, then obviously it will not be good that you assume that he has taken lunch for 300 days. Then in that case, you assume that it is taken for 200 days or 100 days. Any assumption is fine. If they have not given the date of retirement, if an employee is not retiring, you can easily take 300 days or 200 or 100. You can take any days. Gift in kind where the value is more than 5,000. We know there are always 2 opinions as far as gift in kind is concerned for salaries. Whenever an employee receives something in kind from his boss, from his employer, and if the value is more than 5,000, there are 2 opinions, students. Say for example, it is given in question that the gift was of 6,000 in kind. Then the opinion number 1 is entire 6,000 is taxable. And opinion number 2 is it is 5,000 exempt and only 1000 taxable. So examination, what you are supposed to do is, what you are expected is, what you should do is, you write down 6000 taxable, but then also write a working note that it is assumed that entire 6000 is taxable. Alternatively, we can also have an opinion that it is exempt up to 5000 and only 1000 is taxable. So students, these are the three areas in which you should take care while taking your assumptions. But very important, you should always write your notes. You should always write your notes for your assumptions. Now the next point, which will be more helpful in MCQ, is specified employee. Friends, in perquisites, there are few perquisites. I'll give you an example. Say for example, car facility. You must be knowing that in car facility, this perquisite is taxable only if the employee is a specified employee. Now what can happen in, they might create an MCQ which is very complex. Car was owned by employer, it was owned by employee, petrol was given by employer, driver was given by employer, car was used for partly office use, partly private use, fully office use, fully private use. They might confuse you. But the point which you have to remember is, after considering all the permutation combinations and all the calculations, you also have to ensure that car facility and many other perquisites which are there in that list is taxable only for a specified employee, only for these three employees, which are director, substantial interest holder in the company, and cash taxable salary more than 50,000 per annum. So this is also an important area in which few perquisites you have to read very carefully, that they are taxable only for specified employees. They are not taxable for all the employees. So whenever institute tries to conflict or try to give you a lot of information about this perquisites, you should also ensure and see what is the information about the salaries given. They might not ask you question about the salary. They might only ask you whether the perquisite is taxable or exempt. But you have to ensure that the person is a specified employee for the perquisite for being taxable. Thus, 8th point and very important point is TDS rate for salaries. We know that for salary, the TDS section which applies is section 192. Boss will deduct TDS if the income from salary is more than basic exemption limit. But if they ask you a question on TDS, because generally institute asks questions about TDS for 1 mark or 2 marks. Normally with your income from salary sum, they generally don't mix TDS, but TDS can be asked as an independent question. Then in that case, you have to be very sure, you have to be very confirmed that your TDS rate, which is a slab rate for salary, which is given under section 192, will also include surcharge and health and education cess. Especially at CA inter or CA's executive level, you should always remember that salaries and your payment to non-residents, these are two areas in which, along with your TDS rate, say for example in salaries your TDS rate is as per slab rates. For non-resident foreign citizen sports person, it is 20%. But for these two payments, the rate of TDS should also include surcharge and should also include health and education cess. Obviously, surcharge is not required to be included every time. Surcharge is required to be included only if the salary is more than 50 lakhs, or you can say the net taxable income is more than 50 lakhs. So surcharge only if applicable, not always, but health and education cess always. So this point they will not cover in income from salary sums mostly, but definitely if they ask you a question on TDS, you should always remember that salary along with the slab rates, the rate of TDS will also include surcharge and health and education cess. And same is for non-residents. Your 20% under 194E, non-resident foreign citizen sports person will also include surcharge, if any, and it will also include health and education cess. So this is also one of the most important point in TDS which you have to remember. The next point is perquisites. This is a very wonderful point. Students, we all know that in salary, the most important part which institute generally stretches in examination is on perquisites. Now what happens is, when they give you a question on perquisites, student totally forget the meaning of perquisite, because there are too many formulas and too many information to be memorized. So students concentrate on the formulas, they memorize the formulas, but they forget that perquisite means personal benefits which are given by boss to employee. Now what happens in examination is, certain times they give you a certain adjustment which is not a perquisite at all, but which sounds similar to perquisite. I'll give you an example. Employer provided with air travel tickets. Oh, air travel tickets. Oh my God, employer is giving flight tickets. Wow, this sounds like leave travel concession. This sounds like transport facility. But they have given it for office work. So student, if something is given for office work, it is not a personal benefit at all. If I am going on a air flight ticket for my office work to Delhi or to any other city, then how can that benefit be by perquisite? What is perquisite? Perquisite is something which is given for your personal benefit. Say for example, I am going with my family on holidays and the air flight tickets are provided by my boss, then it is a perquisite. So many a times what happens, they give you certain information which sounds like perquisite, but if it is given for office work, it is not a perquisite at all. It is not your personal benefit, and if something is not your personal benefit, it cannot be a perquisite. So such adjustments have to be ignored. This is not a salary, this is not an allowance, this is not a perquisite, this is just an expenditure which is incurred by boss, but it is not incurred for my personal benefit. This is incurred so that I do his work properly. So you have to ignore such adjustments. This is not an income at all, so no effect in your sum. And friends, my last point, but very important point, is about the head of income in which you will cover salaries. See, if salary is received by an employee under a master-servant relationship, under an employer and employee relationship, then definitely that goes under income from salaries. But in your total income sums, in your MCQ sums, you have to be very, very careful that if salary is received by a partner from firm, then it is not income from salaries, it is income from business, or some people also call it as profit engaged on business and profession. So your salary income is not always taxable under the head income from salary. Sometimes it also goes under income from business, like say for example, salary received by a partner. If salary is received by MP, MLA, MLC, then it goes under income from other sources, which I call is at IFOS. So sometimes under IFOS, sometimes under income from business. But yes, if it is covered under employer-employee relationship, master-servant relationship, then it is always income from salary. So friends, last time I helped you with 10 tips for total income and tax liability. Now this time I am up with 10 tips for income from salaries. Similarly, I will also come with 10 tips for capital gains, business, TDS, tax calculation, etc. etc. Thank you very much.